Hello and welcome to the Lancet Voice. It's May 2024. I'm Gavin Cleaver and I'm joined by my co-host Jessamy Bagenal. Thank you for joining us. Today we're talking about the poppiest of subjects, AI. You don't need me to tell you about the strides AI has made over the last couple of years, but sometimes it can feel a bit like a tool searching for an application rather than one particularly suited to anything. We're in the very early stages of seeing how AI, and particularly the prominent headline-grabbing version of AI of the last few years, large language models, or LLMs, in the style of ChatGPT, might be used in healthcare and by clinicians. Jessamy and I thought we'd sit down with Dr. Rupa Sarkar, Editor-in-Chief of the Lancet Digital Health, to find out where we are with AI and LLMs in healthcare. Jessamy and I are joined today by Rupa Sarkar, Editor-in-Chief of the Lancet Digital Health. Rupa, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So I wanted to get you on to talk about large language models in healthcare and AI more broadly, because it's such a rapidly evolving topic. And I thought perhaps we could start off by kind of differentiating what a large language model is from what we're talking about with the broad sweep of AI generally.
Yeah, good question. So AI is a really broad field that encompasses large language models. So large language models is a form of artificial intelligence, but this model has been trained on billions, maybe even trillions of words from various sources, from the internet largely, and large language models use statistical associations between words to make predictions about how words are used together in language to apply these patterns to complete various natural language processing tasks. So I think most of us know what ChatGPT can do in a sense, you know. A lot of us have used it. It can respond to free text queries, a little bit like Google, without any specific training on a task. And this has caused a lot of excitement and also a lot of concern, naturally, about their use in various applications, including healthcare. But what's quite unique about these models is that they're very large. I think GPT-4, the most recent model from OpenAI, has over 1 trillion parameters, and these are growing. I mentioned that they're general. They're trained for a specific task through fine-tuning, but these are add-ons to ChatGPT. They're known as auto-regressive, which means that they're trained on past data to predict future data. They're foundational, so they're the seed for a lot of future products, and they're really challenging our current system at the moment, much more than other artificial intelligence systems have, because they're rapidly evolving and the potential of them is seemingly limitless. And I think it's important to mention, because you often hear, when you hear people from OpenAI, for example, talk about it, you know, they talk about large language models, or their particular large language models, understanding text, being able to communicate like humans do. And that's simply not the case. There is a statistical model just like other artificial intelligence tools. So there are similarities and differences.
How similar is it to that system that you used to have on your phone where you keep pressing the button in the middle and keep predicting what you're going to say?
Yeah. I think it's quite similar, but it's very intuitive, and it's able to learn in real time with the information that you give it. So, and it's able to tune based on the prompts that you give it. So it's much more intelligent than that particular app, and it's getting more powerful as well.
So here's an intensely broad question. What are the applications in healthcare specifically?
Well, I think there's two main areas that we're seeing a lot of progress in at the moment, and it's not limited to these two areas, but we've seen a lot of research in this field and a lot of investment. So one is medical education. In this particular field, there are a large number of ways that it's making an impact. But I think last year there was a Nature paper that described MedPalm. So this is a fine-tuned version of a large language model, and it showed that this language model was able to provide accurate answers to medical questions from the US medical licensing exam questions. I think it was 67% of the time they answered the question correctly, which is pretty high, and much higher than any other model before. We at the Lancet Digital Health published a paper as well, and this was a bit different. It used electronic health records from the UK to predict health conditions an individual might develop in the future. And so this has multiple applications, but in education specifically, it can help clinicians really understand the future projection of a patient care journey, for example. So that's one area. And then the second area is I think we're all familiar with this sort of relentless increase in administration related to clinical work and healthcare, especially, all around the world. But we're seeing this a lot in the US with their electronic healthcare system, with their insurance system. So a very large electronic health record company called Epic, I think they're running over 2,000, almost 3,000 hospitals in the US. That's about a third of hospitals in total in the US, have announced a collaboration with OpenAI, and they have about 60 tools in development. And so that's huge. That is huge. They're being rolled out to patients now. A lot of these tools are to do with, replying to patients' queries about healthcare, producing letters from clinicians. And we actually published a paper very recently, I think it was in the last week, it's coming up in our June issue, about using large language models to reply to patient messages, with the idea that it could improve healthcare by identifying urgent issues and providing education to patients, as well as supporting the workforce. So this came from the Brigham and Women's Hospital, and they found that whilst these LLM-assisted responses reduced physician workload and improved consistency in responses, there were also a lot of errors, which, if left unedited, could lead to harm. So there is a huge need for human oversight and use of these tools, but they are growing in uses, basically. I think we've got a few other studies. So there's one coming out soon on digital pathology. So this is using LLMs to support the work of pathologists in diagnosis, which is another area. And interestingly, recently there was a Nature Medicine study that showed an LLM that can identify errors in pharmacy instructions for dosage or frequency, or highlighting the chances of adverse drug events. So a huge range of uses that are in research at the moment.
I know these models are improving all the time, but from this research and kind of from your perception, how are they ready? What's the kind of maturity level of them like?
So I think it depends on what tasks you're talking about. There are tasks that have higher risk level, but on the whole, I would say no. I mean, I think we all know that these tools have huge levels of error. I think there was a New York Times article that said that ChatGPT in particular were incorrect 3% of the time at the very best, and up to 27% of the time. So there's huge inaccuracies in these tools that require validation in order to be able to use them, and that's not there yet. The tools are obviously black box. I think, it's called OpenAI, but nothing really about the models are open, not even where they get the data from, what kind of parameters they've used to train their model. We simply don't know a lot of this information, but we are able to evaluate the output. So we published a paper from Zach Cohen's group recently that showed that ChatGPT was actually very biased. It's probably not a surprise, but the level of bias was huge. It really perpetuated negative stereotypes across race, ethnicity, and gender. So they really require further evaluation before we can use them. And then, of course, there's other issues like privacy. I think in fact, OpenAI last year was banned from use in Italy because of non-compliance to GDPR rules, and they're still under investigation by the EU. So there's a lot of problems. I think if I'm going to carry on, because I can, there's also cost. It's, huge computing power, much bigger than, I'm not sure of the figures. I'm going to have to go away and look this up, but I think it's over 25% more in terms of computing power for large language models. I think it might even be even bigger. So this cost means that it's dominated to a few regions in the world, the US, the UK, as well as just a few companies. So this has a lot of equity issues that is going to be difficult to overcome.
So it's interesting in the sense that it kind of entrenches inequity in two directions. One, it's sort of a mirror reflecting what's been put into it back out at us, all the biases that it took in the first place. But two, in that also its application is generally increased in high-income countries.
Yeah, definitely. I think I saw a Nature Medicine review on large language models by Daniel Ting, and it was quite optimistic in that they felt like the costs would reduce by the year 2030, which might help with resolving some of the equity issues. But we're really very, very far away, because it's not just costs. It's space. It's the way that these servers are run. It's the amount of water that's used for these servers. The number of components that you need to run one of these models is huge. And unless there's that these companies are able to provide some level of assurances for equity, we're not going to resolve that gap.
Jessamy, I know that you published a comment. Well, you wrote a comment recently in the Lancet about AI in healthcare. I'm keen to hear your thoughts on the topic as well.
There's lots of overlap there in terms of the research that feeds into what we do. I mean, it's really a fascinating space, and I think it's easy to kind of get into the weeds. And sometimes you think about it and it kind of just hurts your head and it just melts, and you think, actually, I don't know what the next 5 years of anything looks like. I think based on the last 5 years of how health tech and digital health has been implemented and integrated into healthcare, I don't feel a huge sense that it's going to be transformative yet, because it doesn't seem to me that we quite have the political economy within, perhaps you do within a private healthcare system, but within universal healthcare coverage health systems, where any extra large language model, has to be developed, which, as Rupa says, is really expensive, and it's really expensive to run. And then it has to be implemented across on an enormous scale. We just don't see that happening very often. We normally see it as supplemental to the major healthcare delivery service, and therefore the actual impact it can have on what physicians are doing on a day-to-day basis, or on very complex patients, or real life, what's happening, still feels fairly minimal. And obviously there's huge, there's great excitement. And I know the Google DeepMind study, the AIME, the large language model that essentially looked at patients, and they were talking about their sort of symptoms, and it was either being diagnosed by a large language model or by a physician. And the large language model showed greater accuracy, but it also showed greater kind of emotion and empathy, which is slightly terrifying. But again, that's in a kind of simple setting, on an online setting. If you're in a GP practice and you've got a patient who's 90 with, 10 different multi-morbidity, comorbidity situations, how does a large language model help you in that situation? And how is it that we can get to a stage where, in that kind of universal healthcare coverage, we are able to implement these tools to help with administrative tasks and reduce the workload in a way that isn't riddled with errors? That still seems to me like quite a long way off. Yeah, I might be incorrect.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, there's no difference between evaluating an AI or a large language model in a healthcare system. It still needs the elements of study design that minimize bias, that pre-specify endpoints, that have comparator groups, and that are transparent. And this all takes time, especially when we have, randomized controlled trials that we need to assess these kinds of tools. So it's not going to happen in the next 5 years, but I think we are going to see progress in the private healthcare system, like you said, especially in the US, where there's a lot of money going into, as I mentioned, electronic health record companies to process insurance claims faster, to handle appeals against.
Which is fantastic, right? All of these things, you can see the potential is so great. It's just there just does seem this gap we can't quite.
I think there's
get
this
over.
Yeah, I think there's this idea that the patient is the ultimate endpoint, and care of the patient is what we care about. But to do that, we need to care for the workforce, and this is where LLMs might have an impact. But of course, this has been said time and time again. I think electronic health records are the reason why a lot of clinicians are burnt out. So I think you're right to be reticent, and I think we need to see what happens in the future. And I think the reason we don't know is because we're not being told what exactly is being developed. We're not being involved. People like us, patients, clinicians, people who work in healthcare don't know what's coming, and we can't help. And I think that's a huge problem for everyone, including LLM developers. And I think that's a huge error on their part.
Is it? Because I don't mean to come across as a Luddite in any way, and I'm all for large language models. I think they can have a huge impact on healthcare. It's just what I'm not seeing is the focus alongside the development of new approaches and applications with actually how we do it. And that's been the case, it seems to me, and Rupa, you'll know more than me, but that seems the case with all digital health tech that we've seen over the last 10 years. And there's just all this focus on new applications, new approaches, new companies to deliver new things. And they all sound very good. I think they're all really well intentioned. They've all got the patient trying to improve, accessibility, trying to improve people's understanding, trying to improve people's access. But I don't see that focus or that link alongside with the health system. And I don't know what we can do to try and get to that stage.
I think it's very slow work. I do see it in some places. You see multidisciplinary teams working together, developing tools that are actually then applied within healthcare settings. So these, not LLMs because it's too early, but I've seen this certainly in some deep learning tools. And I think what we're seeing more of are clinicians that are being skilled in, engineering, AI, and this will take a generation, more than a generation, to develop this sort of multifaceted team. And I think that the tools that you need are changing as well. Before we needed to be able to code, now we don't, and that's thanks to large language models. So I think innovation is just, this is what innovation is. It's all about new things, and only 1 out of a billion will stick.
But if we were to try and give 3 recommendations, or say a few things that we think could actually help to realize the opportunity and the huge benefit that large language models could provide for healthcare delivery, what would we? This is so off the cuff, so sorry.
Jessamy, what a question.
Be basically,
it feels like
things up. But
it feels like you could do a commission on this, right?
Yeah, true.
But let's do it in the next 3 minutes.
I think let's do it in the next 30 seconds. I think the first thing is safety. So there has to be regulation, legal infrastructure that enables safe development of these tools, safe applications, safe implementation. That doesn't exist, and without this, people won't try it. Clinicians don't want to use it. So that's the first thing that we need. And there are WHO, other intergovernmental organizations, academics, journals. We're all working on this, and I think that the problem with this field, like LLMs, is things change so fast. So we're constantly on the back foot, and we can't predict what legal infrastructure we need for when we don't know what the model's going to do. Even in real time, when you use the model, you don't know what it's going to output in the next minute. So, that's the one thing we need to solve for. You said 3 things, right? Does anyone else want to pitch in with a second?
I was going to follow up on that. to say that it often strikes me that not only is kind of, research always trying to kind of catch up as something is accelerating ahead of it, but it also feels like politics and policy is always even further behind than that.
Yeah.
I still sometimes think that politicians don't really have a handle on the internet yet, which obviously we've been living with in our daily lives for decades now.
Yeah, I don't think our politicians really do. Yes, exactly. And I think so education is key then. So that's really second. We really need to understand these tools, understand what the potential of them are, in order to really enable safe application and legal infrastructure, etc. And then the 4th thing is we need everybody involved. We need patients. We need all healthcare workers working on this. If we really think that this is worth the investment, then we need everyone to participate in development of these tools, because otherwise it's never going to benefit anyone.
Really well there, Rupa. I think you've done really well. And the one thing that I wanted to ask, and it's always dangerous to ask about new bodies or organisations because we love creating new things in healthcare, and sometimes, we just change them all the time. They never really make a big difference. But do you think, or have you heard in your travels and your conversations with people, is there a desire for some type of new body or something that looks at this, that isn't just involved in the innovation and the research, but is really focusing on the application? How can we make the most of this new technology, and how can we actually make it improve patients and healthcare providers' lives?
Yeah, I don't know of any new bodies. I know of new sectors, so of bodies. So FDA obviously has their AI group. Funders have their AI group, like NICE. And I think it's quite a tough question to answer, because there are different types of groups that could do different things in this space. Again, because you need so many different people involved, I would struggle to understand what kind of force you'd be thinking of. If you're thinking of something like COVID, during COVID there was a task force that was established in the UK and the US. I think maybe that would be good. I'm not sure.
Thinking about the kind of like something that provides a sort of normative processes and structures that would allow healthcare systems to realize some of these opportunities in a more consistent way across context settings. I don't know, does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does make sense. But I think because this field is so unwieldy, I think it's often referred to as the Wild West, that the focus is really what needs to be determined first before there are any kind of working groups. But saying that, I'm sure that I'm unaware of what is going on politically or globally, but it'd be good to look into it. So I think you make a really good point. Maybe this is a call for them to step up and let us know what they're doing in the Lancet.
I look forward to some letters and some comments coming in about it.
I wanted to ask you, Rupa, because we should point out in the podcast, you recently celebrated 5 years as Editor-in-Chief of the Lancet Digital Health.
Yeah.
In fact, we've celebrated 5 years of the Lancet Digital Health and 5 years of you being in charge of the Lancet Digital Health as the founding Editor-in-Chief. I wanted to ask you what kind of some of the changes you've noticed in AI in that 5-year period.
That's an interesting question, because I think some things have changed, but a lot has stayed the same. There's still a lot of concepts, a lot of tools that aren't making the clinic, that aren't impacting patients, but there's this exponential rise in publications, exponential rise in media interest. So that's remained the same. But what we are seeing is that, at the beginning of the journal, we published a systematic review by Alistair Dennister and colleagues that showed, the level of AI studies at the time, something like, I think it was over 20,000 studies, and only 14% showed clinical use. That has now changed. We now see, since that study, we've now developed guidelines that, thanks to Alistair Denniston, academics, industry, FDA, journals. We've developed guidelines like Consult AI guidelines and many others that our authors are now using to help to report their studies more transparently. We've seen a rise in the number of RCTs that we're publishing of digital tools. So the field of technology is adapting to healthcare, I would say, and really understanding what's required to make a safe and effective technology in 2024. We're now beyond the age of unvalidated spurious results. We're now seeing really good studies, and I think that hopefully in another 5 years will lead to better patient care.
Well, the big question then is, where do you think we'll be in 5 years?
Dare I say, in the same place potentially. I think we'll have some of the same problems, especially the legal and safety issues. But we will know a lot more about what we can do.
Yeah, I just wanted you to ask your reflections a bit, because it's obviously a different ecosystem to the one that we see in other areas of healthcare and medicine, in that it's much more sort of VC heavy. And I wondered what your reflections were on that aspect of it, and how that either complicates it or simplifies it because there's more money sloshing around, or what do you think?
Well, I think healthcare in general is a very complex space, no matter where the money comes from. I think whenever things are for profit, whenever there's a sale involved, the shift focuses, and you see that in the US. In the US, they have the most money spent on healthcare out of tens and tens of countries, and yet they have the poorest healthcare outcomes. So that's probably an indication that having such a large volume of private funding, it might not result in the best outcome for healthcare right now. But then we have to look at space travel, I suppose. And they did eventually get to the moon. But a lot of that was funded by the government initially.
Yeah, a lot of that was funded,
yeah.
Exactly.
And I think, well, if we think about the internet, obviously a lot of that was publicly funded initially as well. So
COVID vaccine.
Exactly, COVID vaccines too. So I don't know if the question about where the money is now coming from is actually that relevant. I think how we want it to be used and the kinds of aims that these companies have is really what we're looking for, especially obviously the ones that are focused on healthcare. And I think that making money is one aspect that helps with longevity, but patient care is at the center of what we're looking at, even in the US.
Yeah, definitely. I guess I just mean more, have you had any observations about how we as healthcare or people in the healthcare space might interact with VCs and people who are funding startups? That some of the technology that startups have are just fantastic. They're great ideas. They're very patient centric. But is there enough linkages between the where that money is funded, where these people are working, and then with actually getting it into healthcare? What's our role in that?
Yeah, well, I think that's a really interesting question, and I wonder if we have something to learn from pharma here, and how we work, or the healthcare system works with pharmaceuticals, in terms of identifying the right language, identifying mutual benefit there. So I think maybe you, Jessamy, as you've been in healthcare a bit longer than I have, if there's any tips from that sector that you might be able to share.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know whether it's the right approach. Many people, get fed up with the fact that it takes so long for pharma to develop medications. Although I think, we haven't, that's changing. But, they do all have massive arms that are busy doing studies and trials and writing them up in correct ways. And we obviously have there's a relationship there with journals and, submitting a lot of research into journals, whereas we don't see that really from startups. And, I'm that's nothing new, but I'm wondering whether that's the right thing, or whether...
Well, we are seeing more of that because regulators, so in order to be FDA approved, a publication within a research journal is one of the prerequisites, even in software. So we are seeing papers from startups, from big companies like Google. There is a research publication culture that's growing, but perhaps you're right. It's started slow, and there needs to be more encouragement. So I think there is more for us to do to really understand the way that startups work, to understand what requirements they need in order to get to the publication stage, including things like IP and timing of their innovations as well, and how they go on to do the further studies for evaluations that we would need. I think with startups, maybe the funding process requires them to move faster and to not be as developed, which is a requirement for us, obviously, in publishing.
Very interesting. I mean, I could go on talking about this for all afternoon, but I won't.
Well, maybe we should leave it there in that case. Rupa, thank you so much for talking with us.
Well, thank you for having me.
And AI, it's an absolutely fascinating area, and hopefully we've shone a little bit of a light on that.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Lancet Voice. Remember, you can subscribe to the Lancet Voice wherever you usually get your podcasts.